a 4-game win streak, an anonymous player poll that had some harsh words about Lindy Ruff, and some rumors. All ahead, coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and thanks for making this Thursday edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. That does include checking us out on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show. Be sure to like and subscribe if you head over there. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is presented by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL, and you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Thursday, an off day for the Buffalo Sabres. There is a lot to get to on today's show. There are injury updates. We've got Elliot Friedman talking about the Sabres. We've got an anonymous NHL player poll that's got some juicy stuff about the Buffalo Sabres, including a thought from one player about Lindy Ruff that might give you a peek into maybe the Sabres locker room, but it also could be a former teammate. You never know. Anyways, more details on that coming up a little bit later on. You got the 4-game win streak as well. Whole lot of stuff to get to on today's episode of Locked On Sabres. If you would like to become a part of our Locked On Sabres text club, if you want to do that, you want updates on these rumors, if you want them broken down for you, I try not to screw over the paywall guys too much, but if I think there's a very juicy Sabre rumor in one of these articles, then I will pass that along to the text club. We'll get injury updates in there if Lindy Ruff ever says anything interesting, of course, and during games, all available to you. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres if you would like to sign up. So before we get to anything, let's get some of the housekeeping out of the way for the Sabres. They did practice on Wednesday. By the way, we had a very good conversation with Lindy Ruff on Wednesday morning on WGR. Me and Jeremy did on a whole lot of things. Mostly, though, asking him about the group and their reaction to Sunday and how it was dealt with behind the scenes. And I would say that they answered the bell on how to deal with it. The Sabres did not push it off or throw it over to the side and say, you know what, no big deal. Everyone's making a big thing of it. It's not really a big deal. We won the game, right? Like a little bit of what Jason Zucker's attitude was after the hockey game, which was, what do you want us to do? We won the hockey game. That's what matters most. And that did not sit well with people. So that's not what the Sabres did. Not at all. Lindy made the one comment about being upset, right, about the group being questioned in the way that they were, said, BS, and then they moved on to other subjects. But ever since then, messaging's been pretty clear. Messaging's been the same. It's been the messaging that Rasmus Dahlin shared after Sunday's game. Rasmus Dahlin was the first one, really, that came out, clearly stated his intention, his feeling about the whole situation. Sunday after the game, Dahlin said, this can never happen again. And ever since that moment, that's been the attitude of everybody. And I'm sure Lindy Ruff has led the charge on that and probably been the most vocal about it. I'm sure Dahlin, as the captain, has been very vocal about it, especially being someone that often will stick up for teammates, often does play with a fire, does play a physical brand of hockey, will fight back when someone's pushed around. Dahlin, I would bet, is in on this too. But Lindy said with us, like, they should feel saddened by Sunday. They should, not saddened in the way where like, oh, woe is me. Like, they should feel embarrassed, kind of, is the way Lindy wanted to get the message across on Wednesday morning, that they should know that can never happen again. And he also, when I asked him about Mattias Samuelsson and Owen Power, he right away is like, those guys know they should have got in there. He's not pulling punches. He is willing to tell you the individuals that need to be better there. And he confirmed, like, Samuelsson and Power. And when talking about Samuelsson, Lindy was very clear and direct about he's got to play an intimidating physical brand of hockey. It's the player, if he wants to be successful in the NHL, Samuelsson, he has to be that because that's the style of player he is. Now, maybe some fans won't like hearing this. I don't mind it. In fact, I kind of think it makes a lot of sense. When talking about Owen Power, Lindy sounded more like, he doesn't have to be the same. He plays a very different style. He's a transporting defenseman that moves the puck up the ice. He plays an offensive brand of hockey. He's top 5 in the NHL in even strength points. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. These aren't exact quotes, but that was the message Lindy wanted to get across on Power, which was, we want him to get stronger. We want him to get more physical. We want him to end plays more often, but he's got another gear. He's got another element of his game that will provide the value for him. Samuelsson, not the same. So from Lindy's standpoint, to me, it sounds like he is giving Power a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and he's not really giving that to Samuelsson. That's how I read it. He made a great comparison on Power, by the way, to Tyler Myers, and how when Myers, I think it was, Lindy said it was after Myers' second year. So at that point, Myers is full grown height wise, right? He's super tall, 6'7", had just been the Calder winner the year before. Year 2, that's age 20, right? And Lindy said they had tried to get him stronger. He did put on a little bit of extra weight, but after year 2, it still wasn't, he wasn't this physically imposing defenseman. Lindy put it that he met with Myers after that season, and Myers said to Lindy, man, I just don't have my man strength yet. And he wanted to get it, but he just, at 20 years old, 21 years old, Myers is telling Lindy, I don't have my man strength yet. And he wants it because he needs it to be that physical brand of defenseman. And that was the comparison Lindy made to Owen Power. And I think it's a good one because Power's only 22 and he's not going to get any taller, but you would expect he is going to get stronger as the years progress, as he gets to 24, 25 years old. You might expect him to be a more physical player by that point because he's just going to be a stronger person. That's going to happen. And that's kind of what Lindy implied. Like, it doesn't always happen right away for everybody. And maybe Power is one of these guys where it's going to take him a couple of years before he could be physically imposing because he's just not that strong right now. For his size, at least, he's not that strong. And I buy that. I absolutely buy that with Power. Doesn't mean he absolutely has to become some physically imposing guy. I still wonder about his there's no mean bone in his body, like Dahlin always had it. Even when Dahlin wasn't physically imposing, you could see a chip in there with Dahlin. And I've never seen that with Power, but I guess we'll see how it turns out for him. And as for now, he's still playing offensively pretty well. So that was the best that we heard from Lindy. He also gave some injury updates, and then we saw what happened at practice. If you hadn't seen, Mattias Samuelsson not on the ice. Tage Thompson was on the ice, skating on his own, and he has a chance to play on Saturday. So does Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Dylan Cousins was not on the ice, and this is with all the trade stuff surrounding Cousins, how 2/3 of the league has contacted the Sabres about Cousins. That was from Pierre LeBrun. How the Flames are interested in Dylan Cousins. Cousins isn't on the ice, and Sabres Twitter is naturally thinking, I wonder if he just got dealt. Not the case. Cousins is dealing with a lower body injury right now. We don't know about his status for Saturday, Sabres' final game before a 2-week break. They're looking for a 5th win in a row, a 4th win in a row against the Columbus Blue Jackets on Tuesday night. And, it was a good game. They played pretty well, given they were missing a lot. They were missing important pieces. They were missing Tage Thompson, and they were missing Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Luukkonen pulls up with a minor injury that day. James Reimer plays in his place. Tage has been vital. Isak Rozan goes up. But then, as the game progresses, Beck Malenstein leaves with an injury. So now they go down to 9 forwards, take Rosine out of the rotation, which for him, that just continues to happen, man. He gets up here and just doesn't play many minutes. Didn't play much at all in the third period. The Sabres went down to 3 lines, and they got the lead and they shut it down. Tuck with 2 goals, and then they were on their heels a little bit. Little lucky for them, the Blue Jackets were without their 3 best scorers on the night, and they hung on and they got the 1-goal win to get it to 4 in a row. It doesn't really change where they're at for the playoffs. They're still just as far out as they were. But good to see the win. And when you're attending these games, it's fun. It's more fun when they win. Now, I'm going to be the jerk here. I'm going to be the eye roll guy here. Yell at me if you want. Might be deserved. I just can't, with a straight face, tell you that fight at the beginning of the game by Dennis Gilbert should have been that meaningful. He fights Matthew Olivier right off the opening faceoff, and good for Dennis Gilbert. He's a tough dude, and I know what he wants to do. He wants to show his own team, and he wants to show people around the league that us as the Buffalo Sabres we're not what you saw on Sunday. That's not us. Good for him. And the locker room ate it up. Right? Tuck spoke about it immediately after the game. Like, they gave him the leather jacket for player of the game in the locker room. The players ate it up. Part of that, by the way, is he had an amazing assist on that second goal that Alex Tuck scored. The second goal the Sabres scored, the first Alex Tuck goal. He had a great apple on the game too, and he's got points in back-to-back games. The fight, though, again, good for them. If they took value in it and they needed it for themselves, then fine. Good for you. I don't make fun of that. I just hope that there's no thought that what that was is going to do anything for around the league, to show the league who you are. Nobody in the world is questioning the toughness and the ability to stand up for a teammate of Dennis Gilbert. Nobody is questioning him of that. This is to go along with the theme that I've been mentioning for a couple of weeks now, where the Sabres sometimes feel that their biggest problems are answered by the guys that play 8 minutes a night. Right? And no offense to Dennis Gilbert, but he's not here very long. He's on a 1-year contract. Maybe they bring him back 1 more year. He's not long for the Buffalo Sabres. He's not critical to their success. He's not a part of the core. Again, I like him. And I'm good with him being on the team as their 7th defenseman and playing the role that he does. But come on. That no one's questioning the guys at the bottom of the roster. No one's questioning whether Beck Malenstein would jump in on a play like that. No one's questioning whether Sam Lafferty would. No one's questioning whether Dennis Gilbert would, whether Connor Clifton would. These guys that are at the bottom of the roster. Nobody cares about those guys. What they care about, and a Sabre fan, what does a Sabre fan care about? They don't question Gilbert. They question the guys that were on the ice. They question Samuelsson and Power. That's kind of how this week has gone for me, and I want to continue to get that across. That I actually don't think Sunday has to be in any way an indictment on the entire team. What it does, I think, have to be is an indictment on a couple of guys that were on the ice. And I think Samuelson's number 1 in that list. I think Power's number 2 on that list. And I think Lindy Ruff might agree, because they had a player meeting on Monday, and there is a report from Elliot Friedman that points to Lindy taking to heart what happened Sunday, being mad about it, and acting on it. What was that act? Well, we might have something here with the leadership group. Get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe DiBiase. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams. Hate one of them. root against them, maybe bet against them. Endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting who's going to score the first touchdown or even betting on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds, feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. A 4-game win streak for the Sabres, still in last place, still 1.4% chance, according to Money Puck, to make the playoffs. So, yeah, season's not. I mean, they would have to go, the math of it, of the current playoff pace, they'd have to go something like 21-5-4, I think, roughly, is what the record is for them to catch the playoff teams. And, yeah, I don't think they're capable of that. Am I wrong on that? I don't think they're capable of that. Anyways, let's get to Lindy continuing to act, and I think act the right way about what happened on Sunday, the reaction to it, and also something that maybe slipped under the radar that I saw actually this morning about what happened on Tuesday. And this got fired up because of what Elliotte Friedman wrote in his 32 Thoughts, which, you know, you see that weekly. There's always like usually one or two about the Sabres, and there were two this today about the Sabres, by the way. One of which is about this subject. Friedman writes, Sabres won 4 in a row. We'll see if there's any long-term fallout from Sunday hit on Tage Thompson that went unaddressed. One player on another team said that he heard from a friend on Buffalo. So, okay, you know, keep in mind, we're a little bit of, 6 degrees of separation here. We got a Friedman talking to a player on another team that heard from a friend that's on the Sabres. So I guess it's 3 degrees of separation. Heard from a friend on Buffalo that there was talk of the leadership group and or alternate captaincies being switched over what didn't happen. That's interesting. And I saw it pointed out on Twitter today, and I saw it on the Sabres roster. I went through and watched the highlights. It was kind of tough to go back, watch the game a little bit. I didn't see anybody wearing an A. So I think this is correct, that the Sabres did not list anybody as being an alternate captain on Tuesday against the Blue Jackets. No one wore the A. And that's interesting. Dahlin wore the C. No one would ever take the C off his jersey, nor would you need to. But kind of a damning sign from Lindy Ruff, right? Like, this is how much I think Sunday was serious. None of you are wearing the A. And we'll see the long-term, again, fallout of that. If that's true, and there are alternate captaincies being switched over what happened, I obviously, everyone's mind should go to the exact same place. Samuelsson losing his A is what I'm currently thinking about. And I wonder if we do get that. Now, he's out right now. He is on IR, I think, even with a lower body injury. He's dealing with something that's nagging. Samuelsson wearing an A, that's what I would think about immediately. Maybe Cousins, but he's not on the ice there. Tuck, I don't think so. Tuck was pretty vocal about that can never happen again, too. Like, I think Samuelsson losing his A is very much on the table here. Speaking of Tuck, by the way, while we're at these 32 Thoughts, there was one other on the Sabres. And Friedman said, quote, if he's available, I can see Tampa Bay lusting after Alex Tuck. They wouldn't be the only ones. This is about the second time I've seen it mentioned from Friedman, the idea of Alex Tuck being traded. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's in the cards. I don't want to also believe that it's impossible. I think it would be a black eye for Kevin Adams, who walked in with a mentality of players that want to be here, found the one guy in the league that was truly enthralled to become a Buffalo Sabre. And over the course of a couple of years, he wants to go, or he's okay going. You trade him, when he's pretty good, he's a really good player. That is pretty tough. And the reason I don't want to say there's no way or like that there would be some chance is they do have to figure out a contract with him. He is going into the final year of his deal next season at $4.75 million. Now, will Tuck commit? In essence, you would think yes, because he grew up a Sabre fan and he talked about wanting to be here. I also don't want to assume it. He has been to the finals. He knows what it's like to be on a great team. If he wants to win a cup, that might overrank his desire and love for the Buffalo Sabres. You know? If I were him, I would think about it. I was a Sabre fan my entire life growing up as a kid. And if every kid that plays hockey dreams of playing in the NHL, right? And what team are you playing for when you're dreaming of being in the NHL? The Sabres. And I would tell you that, if I had grown up to be 6'4" and had the hockey talent that Alex Tuck does, and we're currently on the Buffalo Sabres with 1 year left on your contract, I tell you, I would be thinking about it. I'm not sure I'd do it, but I would be thinking about it. And that, to me, is why you're probably seeing his name pop up on the market. I still, though, with all that being said, would bet heavily against him being traded, personally. What could you get for him? You could probably get a lot. First-round pick, a prospect. Are you getting a hockey trade done for him with the Tampa? That I doubt, because Tampa wants to, go all in. So, kind of like the other guys. Sure, I'll listen on Alex Tuck if I'm Kevin Adams, but I don't want to pick some prospects. You got to make a hockey trade for me. That's where I'd be. When we come back, there was an anonymous player survey done by The Athletic, and there's a pretty damning comment about Lindy Ruff. So kind of a little bit of a look into, should we be blaming Lindy for what's happening this year? Well, there might be a player that thinks so. That will be returned here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by Gametime. If you are looking for tickets to the next big event, whether it's a concert, there's one locally here in Buffalo tonight down at the arena that I'm going to, and there's a lot of great tickets available on Gametime, whether it's a comedy show, one of these hockey games, Bandits games, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've used Gametime Picks in the past, of course, and even recently, and I got it. It's the quickest way to do it. You don't have to spend all this time scrolling through tickets like, oh, this one's good, but this is where the section is, and this is the cheapest one, but this section, it's a lot easier when you're just using Gametime Picks. Best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Not 100%, 110. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something pops up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Sabres are off until Saturday, their final game before the Four Nations break. They will be in Nashville for an 8 o'clock puck drop. There was an anonymous player survey done by The Athletic yesterday, and there were 110 players that filled out this survey, and there were a couple of notes on the Sabres that I wanted to get into on today's episode. One, they asked about no trade clauses, and more specifically, who's the first team on your no trade clause if you have one? That doesn't mean, who's on the most, right? Because if every player in the league has the Sabres number 2 as their second team on their no trade clause, that still means 100% of the league has the Sabres on their no trade list. So there's that. But the Sabres did not finish first. The team that's on your no trade clause, who was number 1 and who was number 1 by a lot, it was the Winnipeg Jets, surprisingly. No, not that surprisingly. I know players don't want to play in Canada, and we know players don't want to play in Winnipeg specifically. They're great, though, right? They have the most points in the NHL, so kind of tough to be them. They're the ones who should be talking about not having palm trees, right? Because they're great and they still can't attract players. Tough. I mean, if the Sabres were as good as Winnipeg, I don't believe they would have as hard a time. They'd have it, they'd have a tougher time than some teams for sure, but I don't think they would be like the number one team on no trade list bad if the Sabres were as good as the Jets are, but they're not. So there's the Sabres at number 2, and all the comments from anonymous players on why that's the case, all what you would think. They've never won. They're on a 14-year playoff drought. Kind of an attitude of same, like what I just said, like, hey, if they got good, I would consider it, but the team has never won. They just don't win. That was the sentiment from players in this survey of why the Sabres are on their list. It has nothing to do with Buffalo. I'm sure some it is, but they didn't say that. It's surprising to me no one mentioned the organization being a dumpster fire. Again, those could be feelings that are harbored that just don't come right to mind. Everyone common thread was, yeah, they just don't win. That's it. They just don't win. If they won, maybe I think about it. But they don't. Now, the more interesting thing from this survey that I wanted to get into is about Lindy Ruff. One of the questions in the survey was, is there a coach in the league you just wouldn't want to play for? And I think Tortorella was number 1, and there were other guys. Mike Babcock got, voted for, even though he wasn't eligible because he's not a current coach. But a handful of players voted for Lindy Ruff. And one anonymous player's quote made it into the story from The Athletic. And it was, quote, "I just think he's too old. I don't think he understands the game anymore. That's what I hear from the guys that play for him, that he just doesn't know what's going on most of the time." End quote. When you first read that, the takeaway on the surface would be, oh, there's a player or players in the Sabres locker room that don't think Lindy's got it anymore, that thinks he's too old and that he doesn't understand the game anymore. And that's how I read it at first, right? And that could be the case. It could very well be that this anonymous player knows players on the Sabres, and this is what he hears from them, that Lindy just doesn't have it. He's old. He doesn't get it. That could be what's happening here. It doesn't have to mean that, though. Don't assume it's coming from the Sabres locker room. It could be from the Devils, right? That anonymous player, what does he say? What I hear from the guys that play for him, I guess he's saying play in the present tense, but maybe he means former Devils players that he knows or that had him for the last couple of seasons. Very easily could be the case. So I don't want to pretend to know who made that, who's telling this anonymous player Lindy doesn't have it anymore, but it's at least possible that it's coming from the Sabres locker room, which would be very interesting. I don't know what the players think of Lindy. I know how they talk about him, and they talk about him like they have the utmost respect for him. I could tell you they don't really play his system all that well, right? I could tell you Lindy's tried every combination in the book with this group, and nothing's really worked. I could tell you he's very mad at them for Sunday, right? Like, I just don't know to what extent the players respect Lindy. Like, it's easy for us to respect Lindy if you're here because we've grown up with Lindy. I've grown up with Lindy. He was the only Sabre coach I ever knew until I was, 18 years old, right? My dad would have grown up with him as a player. We all know Lindy. We know him in the community. We know what a legend he is. We know he's the winningest coach in franchise history. We know he's the top 5 winning coach in NHL history. We respect Lindy. And we know Alex Tuck does, right? Because he's like one of us. He grew up with Lindy as being the coach. But you gotta sometimes in exercises like this, try to put yourself not in your own shoes, but in the shoes of a player on the team. If I almost don't want to pick a player out, but I will just for the exercise here. If I were, I don't know, Ryan McLeod. Ryan McLeod is 25 years old, right? And what should Ryan McLeod think of Lindy Ruff? He played for Edmonton. He has no connection to the area. Other than, I guess, he's from Mississauga. That's not Buffalo at all. It's Toronto, really. But he's from Canada. He played in Edmonton. What is he supposed to think of Lindy Ruff at 25 years old? Tell me, because The last time the Sabres were great with Lindy as the coach, the last time Lindy had gone deep into the playoffs, how old's Ryan McLeod? Ryan McLeod's a 7-year-old kid the last time that happened. Who's a coach that was great when you were 7 years old? Ask yourself that question and then ask, well, if he was coaching today, what would I think of him? I don't want to just assume that all of these players have the utmost respect for Lindy Ruff. They might have just been introduced to Lindy Ruff. They might hardly know anything about him before this season, other than, well, he was the Devils coach the last couple of years. So I don't know what they think of Lindy. I think it's a good question. I don't want to assume that they all have the utmost respect for him. I don't want to also assume that this quote is coming from the Sabres locker room, but maybe something to keep an eye on because yes, Lindy is in an advanced age. I think there's been a wonder about him getting today's game. I have worried about that less so because Lindy's been so adaptable in his career, but it's certainly not gone well this season. So I don't know. Sometimes I struggle with how much blame to put on Lindy Ruff's shoulders. I feel like personally there is not a coach in the league that would have this team in a playoff race. That's how I feel. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a better coach in the league than Lindy Ruff. There are that could probably get more out of this group. I just don't think there's a lot more to squeeze out of this group. I think this is about it. I think the group's kind of broken. I don't think they're that talented. And I think you can only do so much with that. So we'll keep an eye on it, see if any more smoke comes about the players and Lindy, but I kind of guess not. This is the first thing we've really heard all year, kind of implying it. All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow. We'll look ahead to Nashville a little bit. We will have a mailbag edition of tomorrow's episode and some more fun stuff as well. We'll talk to you tomorrow. If you want to check out some football content, Myles Garrett talk and more, Joe Marino on Locked On Bills, Steal and Flip got to be covered on Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Check out all our great Locked On content throughout the week as we get you ready for the big football game, of course, on Sunday as well. Thanks for listening. This will be the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.